Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Give Me God of War walkthrough, and we're going to be making our way outside of Helheim. We just killed the boss, and we now have his heart, after a rather graphic cutscene, or mini-game if you could call it that, of stabbing him in the chest. And you might have noticed that wrought throughout the world have been these interesting spherical objects that have a green glow to them. These strange pieces of machinery that you knew you were going to be interacting with later on, but you couldn't quite tell when. Well, now is that moment. You're going to give Brok your Blades of Chaos, and he's going to come back with a particular upgrade for them. And I found this to be quite interesting because I thought that it would do more than it does. It's going to enable you to interact with Hell's Wind, which is the element that you get from these particular pieces of machinery. And the colour of them reminds me of... Is it God of War 3, where you got the green blades? Because you get the Hades ones, which are purple, you get the standard ones, and then you get those green ones later on. It reminds me kind of that. And I was hoping that this would be used in some kind of boss fight, but it didn't end up happening that way. And all you do is you transfer one energy source to the next energy source, and it enables you to do certain things like puzzles and chests and such. And I thought it would be interesting if there was a boss that you could only damage when you were powered up with that Hell's Wind. They could have had there could have been a double fight against two enemies. One enemy that moves quite quickly, and then another enemy that moves rather slowly. The enemy that moves slowly has the Hell's Wind device maybe on the emblem of his shield or whatever, a very defensive character, and then you get the power up off of him and use it to kill the other one. And then when the other one dies, the guy with the shield gets rid of the shield, and then he's vulnerable to kind of everything. And have it used in an interesting manner of something like that. But then when you play the game, you realise it's just it's just essentially a key. It's a fancy key for a bunch of doors that you passed earlier on and wondered about. So not quite as interesting as it could have been, but you know, still adding to that Metroidvania aspect. And here's another cheesy strategy that I've got for you. So, because those Reavers have access to that icy spell now, I'm going to be backing up a little bit and feeding them all into doorways, and then bouncing them with the heavy attacks and then keeping them juggled, which is such an effective strategy and the reason why the blades are so wonderfully powerful. You can shut the door and have success attacking through the door, but you can also get attacked back through the door. So as much as it's fun to trigger the fight, back up, remove the Hell's Wind, shut the door, and then spam R2 through the door, I ended up getting punched doing that. As cheesy and as hilarious as it was. So, just a word of warning if you've thought about doing it. I did too, and it did work, and it can be functional, but you can also get hit. So just be careful. But here's another puzzle that's going to get us a nice chest. It'd be cool if, on the difficulties and stuff, you could change what you get in the chests, because the only things that I want from the chests, really, are resources, and it really made me miss the red orbs, too, because one of the coolest parts of the old God of Wars was just all the orbs that you got, and all the orbs, big clusters floating around, and of course it came from games like Onimusha and Devil May Cry and games like that, where every enemy dropped these colourful orbs and you used them, and it was just a very PlayStation 2 kind of aesthetic, wasn't it? And God of War was one of the champions of it, because there was tons of orbs in those games, and then this game has kind of done away with them, which is unfortunate. But here we go again with more Hell's Wind, sorry. Chris Waddle. Stick it into the machine, and then we can open the doorway. And there's an interesting sequence coming up after this next few fights, but we're going to be fighting a Traveller first, so I should talk about this guy as I chew my words, because I'm sweating like a dog in this wonderful heat. So, Traveller, this variant, does not have a shield, which means he's much more aggressive, and he has access to kind of a similar moveset, but there's a little bit of differences. I wanted to see if the guard break was good against his armour. It's not. That right there, that ground pound that he does, and the big AoE, is one of the fairest AoEs in this game. I am a big fan of just how fair that manoeuvre is. But he's kind of the same. He does these horizontal swings, these vertical swings. He does 3 horizontals in a row. He does that big thrusting unblockable. He does a lot of the overheads, and in combination with horizontals. When you get too close and hit him too much, he likes to try and get you off with the AoE. He's pretty simple. But at the same time, if you miss any of this and you get touched by any of it, you're dead. Because he does incredible damage. And there is a triple hit combo that he does where he spins around, and there might even be a fourth hit where you can block all of it. And it's weird because it just seems strange that everything is, you know, breaks your block, unblockable, breaks your block, unblockable. And then he does a full combo of identical looking moves and you can block the entire thing. So just, I don't really understand how that works. Maybe it's to keep us on our toes as players. This is a fast one, by the way. And you can moderate it into the verticals. But because his armor's gone, he's dancing around now, and we're able to hit him with a ton of fun stuff. Hit him with some heavy attacks. There's the horizontal. And that's another move, guys. You know, if you dodge to the left when he does that swing and you go into the slow motion from the amulet, if you're on the blade at the end of your roll, you will recover into active frames and take damage. It's happened to me a ton of times. So be very careful when dodging their attacks. But the Travelers always look really easy when you get to the end of the fight, because by the point where you get that successful kill of them, you've taken a bunch of sloppy hits and been murdered a few times. And of course, in a walkthrough such as this, I'm not going to show you the amount of times when I got clipped by stupid bullshit because I was too aggressive and such, or I missed a timing, but it does happen, and you need to be aware of that. That is not an easy enemy by any means. Fundamentally, they're simple, but simple doesn't always mean easy. And he can mess you up. But get good at that particular character and understand his movesets, because there's a bunch of areas in the Lake of the Nine where there are a bunch of high-level Travelers. And if you can get good at understanding how to kill them and not worrying about instantly dying from those horizontals and what have you, you should be fine. But here are a couple more of the Revenants throwing ice at me. And there are a couple of nightmares knocking about, so be ever so careful with them. The next fight coming up is the fight I really dislike in this section, because you take on a bunch of enemies just like this, and then you push forward and you take on a bunch of Freakazoids, and then you push forward and then there's more enemies. There's like 3 separate pockets of enemies, and they're all on the same checkpoint. And it's just a little bit tedious if you're trying to do it really clean. And it's one of those sections where if you could touch the door at the end of it, I'd just run past everybody, because it's just an ensemble of people that aren't very fun to fight. So I'm running past this first spawn, but I end up fighting it later on anyway. I don't know why there wasn't just an experience and a checkpoint. It would have made it simpler. I'm running past the Freakazoids, and then as you get up here, a bunch of dudes stop you from coming through the doorway because they're just kind of chilling. But if you come down here, there's a wonderful corridor that's going to funnel them all. The only problem with this strategy is that the people who throw projectiles and who do that ground shockwave can hit you through the wall. So that gets a little bit hairy. But I wanted to use my rage just because I haven't done any rage strategies for a while. So I'm going to choke them all down into this bottom area, and then I'm going to go and do the heavy attack on the rage and knock them up. And as you see, when you've got them cloistered like this, it's kind of crazy what it does to them. And of course there's a couple of nightmares just to be a nightmare. 100% intended. And I think I'm going to get hit by a shockwave through the wall or some shit. Or maybe even a nightmare, potentially. But I can hit them through the wall, so it's kind of, you know... There it was, something hit me then. Very strange. Oh, and there's a nightmare, he hit me too. But it's just an ensemble of enemies that if you're patient and you take your time, you'll have no problem with. But I was in a rush to get back to the game, because I think this part of Helheim is really contrived. I really do. You should have just gone into it, it should have been really fantastical, it should have been a big gate, it should have been a big epic boss fight, and then you should have got the hell out of there. Of all the parts of the game, I feel like this particular instance feels like filler. And later on, when you come back to Helheim, I think all the fights in that section are pretty spot on. I think they're fun, I think there's a nice theme to it, and I think it all blends and works really well. But just in this occasion, it would have added to the build-up if it was a little bit more reserved, I think. Of course, if you're coming here for action and you just want fight, then maybe you love the fact that there's a couple of extra fights chucked in here. And especially if you're an old God of War fan, because the fights were the main appeal, right? But when I run back here, I thought all the dudes had chased me. But you know that initial spawn of those 3 Reavers? They're all here. So I have to do this one anyway. And it's just that moment of being like, really? Because I'm going back for the Hell's Wind. And I'm doing it because there is a runic ability. I didn't know at the time, but I was wondering if it was one of the good ones, one of the ones I like. So I wanted to grab it. And in the spirit of this walkthrough, I have been opening chests and doing a lot of puzzles that I would have normally just, not even done. Avoided, removed from the walkthrough so that it was all concise and main game. And it might have saved me 10 hours or something. But I'm enjoying what I've done with this God of War. I'm liking the guide I've made. I'm liking the videos I've presented. And I hope you're liking them as well. It's a long guide. There is exactly 10 videos left. And there are not many guides that get this long. And it's a testament to just how much they've put into this game and how much they've given us as consumers, which is really nice of them. But it must be said, it would be superb if there was an encounter selector like in Uncharted 4, because I'd love to be able to jump between the fights and not have to do all the traversing and all the talking and all the fucking story. And the first time, the story is fantastic. I liked it. I got into it. I was invested. I'm a big fan of Christopher Judge, thanks to Stargate. And I think he did a superb job. I think the story itself is a little bit meandering and a little bit, too many princesses in other castles. But by the end of it, you realise that the grand story is not the important part. It's that close-knit, slow, developing pathos between father and son, which I think they did really, really well. And then later on, there's a couple of truth bombs that end up landing, and you're like, oh my god, they were building towards a larger thing. And I think it's easy to see that. However, like a lot of things that there are going to be, criticisms. By the way, I missed Hell's Point just here. You want to put it up where that Odin's Raven was, and it will enable you to make this run. But I forgot to do that, so apologies there. But one of the things that I think is both a quality and a problem with this game, when it comes to the way its story is driven, is God of War is traditionally this big pantheon of high rollers. You start off in the early games as quite a small figure, and by the end of them you are catapulted into the breadth of this fiction as this deicide machine, right? You are a killer of gods. You've slayed the most important figures in this pantheon. Like, you're pretty big. You're kind of a big deal. And then you come into this one, and it kind of feels like you're given the B-tier stuff. And I don't know whether to applaud this because it's not what I was expecting, or to lament it because it's not what I wanted. But I'm not sure, because on one hand it made the pacing of the game and the encounters unconventional and unexpected, but on the other side, did you really think we would play a 35-hour campaign and never bump into Thor? Never bump into Odin? Never fight these people or come across these larger aspects of the whole pantheon? Because I didn't. I didn't think we were going to be touching on, the tertiary cousins, side sisters of all these people you've never heard of. Like, the biggest interaction is probably Freya. But you spend most of the game not knowing she's Freya. And then, the game hasn't got across just how important Freya is. It's giving you teasers and little bits here and there, and of course Mimir is like, it's Freya, goddammit, it's a big thing. But I don't think they conveyed just how important Freya is, as much as they told us, oh, she's married to Odin. There's a lot of people that have been like, who the fuck's Odin? Not everybody's played Final Fantasy VIII, right? But it's a big thing. It's a huge thing.
Welcome to surprise me.
And it's kind of crazy how they did it. And what I think it leads to, for me, because I'm not saying it's bad, because I don't think it's bad, it's just a different kind of progression. Oh, by the way, guys, I'm going to be doing a little bit of side stuff here, so we've come to the ruins of an ancient to fight a soul devourer. I'm doing this because the ancients never evolved. They're always a really easy, silly fight, and the only thing that changes is how much you have to hit them. But I feel like the beginning of this game with the first boulder encounter is probably the high point of the game, because it's the most ridiculous, awesome, Superman 2 slugfest between superpowers, and then nothing reaches that same peak, not even remotely close to it. And it's almost like it blew its load. And does it mean that there's not big moments later on, and there's not epic fights later on, and epic encounters? No, there are. But there's nothing like that. And I think the weird disconnect for me as a player, as a God of War fan, is that in the old God of Wars, every fight was like that. It was all these ridiculous, big, built-up, insane encounters of god-slaying and craziness and ultra-violence, right? And then in this game, it doesn't really happen, and it happens so early. The first example of it, you think there's going to be so many more instances of it, and then every encounter afterwards is nowhere near it. And on one hand, it's kind of interesting, right? That the one thing the game is known for, this game intentionally shies away from it to try and diversify itself. That's both admirable and good for the series. But as a player, you're expecting these crazy events that never happen, and you kind of feel like you've been given the filler episodes, the B-sides, and you haven't heard the full album yet. And of course, it's sequel bait, right, isn't it? All of these big dudes that we thought we'd bump into and these larger aspects of the Norse pantheon have been intentionally held so that you'll meet them later to give them more effect. And when you tell a story about a character that's never really seen, it adds legend and builds an appeal and a luster to the information around them. It gives them this allegorical status, these people spoken of but never seen, and then when they are seen, it's a much grander reveal. So it'll probably pay off for the third game, but in this game, like, that fight with Baldur where you're just ripping each other apart through buildings and trees and the earth itself, and it's all Dragon Ball Z, I don't think there's a single part of this game, even the final part, where you have these colossal events happening, which is very grand in scale, but it doesn't feel as big or as momentous as you beating up a little blue tattooed crack addict in your back garden.